at the role of peer review. So there's a few things that you need to know in this section of the specification. You need to be able to define peer review. What is it? You need to understand the process involved in peer review and the purpose, as well as the strengths and limitations. So why is peer review really important in psychological research and in science in general, and the criticisms of peer review also. So let's start with what is peer review. So peer review by definition is the assessment of scientific work by others who are specialists in the same field to ensure that research intended for publication is of high quality. So peer review takes place before a study is published. Once a researcher has conducted their research and analysed their data and written up their scientific report, before it gets published in one of these journals, so psychology has hundreds, if not thousands, of academic journals around the world. Before it gets published in one of these academic journals, it's put through the peer review process. And essentially, it's a quality control process used by publications, used by these academic journals, to ensure that only high quality, methodologically sound information is presented in the publication. We want to make sure that anything that is published in a credible scientific journal is of the highest quality. So let's have a look at the process for peer review. So after the researcher has written up their report, they're going to send it for independent scrutiny by other psychologists working in a similar field. So for example, if I would like to publish work in memory, I've conducted some experiments into working memory, for example, I might send it to the Journal for Cognitive Psychology, who might then approach experts into working memory. So for example, Baddeley himself. So we're looking for experts on that topic. This is all done anonymously, so we never really know who has peer-reviewed our work. And we'll talk about why that's important and perhaps why that's an issue a little bit later on. So we send our work for independent scrutiny to other psychologists in a similar field, and this will be organised by the academic journals to maintain confidentiality. The work is assessed on basically every factor. It's assessed on the appropriateness of the research methods and the designs that have been employed. We consider the validity of the study. We consider the significance of the results. Significance in terms of statistical significance. So is the data significant, i.e. did it occur due to a factor other than chance? Was it due to the manipulation of our variables? And we're also going to be assessing it based on its significance to society. How important is it that this research is published and is in the public domain? We're going to assess the work based on its ethics, ensuring that all ethical principles were adhered to, any errors that might have been made, and its originality. We want to really push science forward, so we want to be publishing new work that is unseen. After that, after it has been sent to the reviewer and considered on all of these factors, the reviewer has a few options. It can either accept the manuscript, accept the work as it is. If it's perfect and it's significant and contains no errors, it's original, it's valid, it's appropriate, they can accept the manuscript as it is. They could accept it with revisions, and so there might be a number of changes that need to be made, but overall it's still accepted. It might be sent back to the researcher, and they might be given revisions that they need to make. They might need to, for example, reanalyze their data or change their conclusions. Or it might just be flat out rejected. It might be so full of errors and so unethical and unoriginal that it gets rejected from publication in the journal. At that point then, it is the editor's job to decide whether it's going to be accepted for publication or rejected. So the peer reviewers, the people who are scrutinising the work, will then send it to the editor with their notes, and it will be the editor's final choice whether it gets published or not. So why do we do this? It's a pretty lengthy process, so why bother? There's a few reasons why peer review is absolutely essential in any scientific process. The first one is to validate the quality and relevance of research. We're scrutinizing it, and this prevents spreading of irrelevant findings or unwarranted claims or unacceptable interpretations of data. It's going to prevent fraud in some cases, and it just generally improves the quality of research. And this is really important, obviously, for the reputation of psychology and the reputation of science in general. It's important for allocating research funding. So another purpose of peer review is to decide which research is going to get funding, for example, by the Medical Research Council or by governments. So rather than every single person fighting for funding, which is really limited, peers will assess whether a research proposal is important, whether it's valid and it's original and worthwhile, and therefore the people who are funding research can hear from experts in the field whether a study is worth investing in. So it's important to allocate research funding. And it's important to ensure that it's only the highest quality research that is published and is heard about by the public. So because peers are suggesting revisions for work, it's only the best work that is going to be published in these journals. We're going to be identifying any errors, and it means that researchers really need to work hard to make sure that their research is the best that it can be. These journals, some of them are more credible than others. For example, Nature is probably the hardest journal to get published in because every single piece of work is scrutinized. Every single word in that manuscript is going to be considered. And so you can tell by the quality of the peer review process how credible a scientific journal is. So let's have a look then at the strengths and the limitations of peer review. So the main strength of peer review is that it establishes validity and accuracy of research, and this promotes high standards. It ensures that only the highest quality research is disseminated and available as a body of scientific evidence. Because anything that is published in an academic journal becomes part of mainstream thinking and practice, we need to be absolutely certain that any conclusions that are drawn and published are based on valid methods and accurate data. We need to be absolutely certain that any research that is in the public domain is accurate. It prevents scientific fraud because all of the work is scrutinized, and so the data can't be fudged. Somebody will pick up on it, hopefully. Although we're going to talk about this a little bit later on in lessons, because fraudulent research is unfortunately not unheard of, even with the peer review process. And it increases public trust in science. If research was published without peer review, without checking and scrutiny, poor research might be disseminated, and this would damage the integrity of psychology or science in general. So knowing that any research that is published in an academic journal has been scrutinized, it means that public trust in science is maintained, and we can maintain the integrity of psychology as a scientific discipline. However, there are some issues. There might be some conflicts of interest. So, for example, the peer review process is anonymous. So the academic journals are the ones who decide on the peers who will scrutinize the research. And this can create some conflicts of interest. So the peers, because they're remaining anonymous, might not be honest in their appraisals of the manuscript. They might want to reject a manuscript because it might, it might pose problems for their own reputation or their own career. So for example, if I submitted a manuscript that showed Baddeley's ideas about the working memory model were wrong, then Baddeley, receiving this manuscript, might just flat out reject it due to his own conflicts and his own agenda. And so the fact that it is kept anonymous can pose problems. If you're sending work to rival psychologists, they might not give a fair appraisal. It can also perpetuate the publication bias. So one of the processes of peer review is to make sure that any work is significant and is important. And so it means that any studies which find a non-significant result, for example, studies that suggest a drug doesn't help treat depression, are unlikely to get published. They're just not as interesting if the findings are non-significant. And this can perpetuate that file drawer phenomenon, where any non-significant studies are buried in a file drawer, never to see the light of day. And this can mean that the body of evidence is then skewed. And a further limitation is that it may suppress groundbreaking research that oppose mainstream ideas. So if everybody in the field, if all of our peers who are reviewing our manuscript believe in the value of psychoactive drugs to treat mental illness, then a study which suggests that they're damaging might get suppressed. They might get buried because all of these peers are all following a mainstream view. And so it means that any groundbreaking research, anything that is very, very new and novel and goes against the mainstream, might get buried. And this can really slow down the progress in science. So we're going to have a look at other issues in lessons and in extension clinics. We'll look at fraudulent research a little bit further, and we'll also look further at transparency issues in the peer review process. For example, perhaps it's worthwhile knowing how long it takes different academic journals to pass the peer review process. Those that can pass a study in a day perhaps aren't doing their due diligence. And so we're going to have a look at transparency issues in the peer review process and look at fraudulent research even further.